It's sometimes scary when you think about the genetic evidence of ancient Egypt and the fact that it's been 5 years since this came out, and still it has not answered the question of who the ancient Egyptians were. Perhaps one of the things that didn't help was the fact that it only covered the maternal line and did not have any real results on the paternal line. And I'll tell you why. So, to us, when we look at genetic evidence, we want to believe that yes, it's conclusive and it's the end, and we look at it and it happens and blah blah blah. But if you look here, you will notice. So we have on here some list of ancient Egyptians. We have Yuya, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ramses III, an unknown man, E. Now, of course, this is from 2020. I've talked about this a lot of times, but we have to talk about it once again because it's important to recognize what is happening in some of these genetic things, why there are still experts who question it. And of course, if we look there at the bottom, it's these two who come from a completely different line, E1B, 1A. Now, E1B1A, according to, so let's just remove everything we know, according to modern Egyptologists, is inherited from the slave trade in Egypt today. And so we find this in low percentage in North Africa. But according to them, it only came in the slave era because this is a West African DNA. It's not an East African or a Nilotic DNA, it's a West African DNA. This is not about this DNA specifically. What it's really about, and this is why I have to talk about it the way that I am, is it's about how DNA has come to become the same as any other evidence where people believe it if it gives the story that they want to hear. If it's exactly what they want to hear, they go, that's exactly right. And if it's the opposite of what they want to hear, they go, well, I don't know. At this point, everybody recognizes exactly what this is. But it's not just a cool reconstruction of what Europeans might have looked like in the past. Instead, for me, it symbolizes denial when it comes to Europeans. So, because of genetics, Europeans assume that this should be the color of the ancient Europeans. And of course, they would be considered black by any definition today. And this is the same color, by the way, of the Yemenite people who are, if you use the argument that there were Asians in Africa, in Egypt, this is what they would have looked like in that period. And there's a lot of people in Yemen who are not mixed who look like this. They're the desert dwelling people as well. Now, forgetting that argument, why is it important to point this out? Well, like I played that Sargon of Akkad video the other time, remember what he said? He denied that he must have been that dark. Why would he deny this? Is it because the evidence is not solid? Is it because the evidence shows something slightly different? No. He denies it because it's inconvenient. It does not suit his worldview. And I've noticed this with DNA. I think a lot of this genetic, all of that, I think it only really comes into play when it comes to courtrooms and stuff like that for real. Because, of course, we've heard of people taking tests and then their siblings having different results. Although the results aren't the different one, it's the craft around the results. There was another video I was going to react to that had this ancient Egyptian race controversy in, but unfortunately has a lot of copyrighted music. I tried, it keeps giving copyright, so I deleted it. I'm not even going to point to it because whatever. But what I liked was the last part in the video where the person was about to talk about the DNA part of ancient Egyptian DNA. But then he says, wait a minute, let's stop here. Let's not talk about the DNA because, first of all, the news takes DNA and runs with it as if they know what they're doing. And we know that even in the African circles, they like to take the DNA and be like, oh, you're super related to this guy and you're super related to that guy. And I think DNA to some degree has become a sort of mythological thing which people just use as a way to sort of put people in a certain box, and of course I've talked about how we can look at certain Middle Eastern groups, especially those close to Egypt, and how their DNA is more German, but if you go and look, they're going to say that they're closer to people in Israel, but it doesn't matter. Now, of course, the race and the question of the race of the ancient Egyptians is a complicated one. And we do have many sections of this controversy going through. The first one, of course, being they were black, the second one being they were Middle Eastern, and the third one being they were multicultural, meaning, or multiracial. They use multicultural, but they mean multiracial, meaning that it's a combination of black people and Middle Eastern people. Now, the reason why the first two are kind of dismissed is because they make sense, but they stop making sense at some point in history, no matter where you put it. At some point, the ancient Egyptians did have foreigners coming in large numbers. This question is still very, very important. And I, like I said, am very sympathetic to it because I mean, 10 years I've been thinking about this question. And every single year, you look up new information, and it seems like we're further away from answering the question than we've ever been. I mean, I will say, in about 10 years ago, I was on the side of, okay, they're definitely black, but, you know, some people from Yemen, Saudi Arabia region must have come in maybe, 1000 BC, that type of time. Now I have no idea exactly when foreigners could come in. I still think ancient Egypt is a pure African born civilization that is bred from the black tribes and then was enhanced by several meetings with different people, which I've shown are documented on the walls. In a strange way, I am a little bit more proud of the sort of Kerma Nubian culture for preserving enough of the history till the future. I'm very disappointed that the later people dropped the ball because, of course, as you can see, they were still writing in the language of the ancients up until about 700 AD. It is very disappointing to know that it slipped away through the hands of some very careless people after it was preserved for so long. And in fact, the way that it's written, if you see some comparisons, it's different than that of the Greeks. For when the Greeks came and wrote in ancient Egyptian, they sort of moved things around and started creating their own letters so that it can be written in a way that's more familiar to the Greeks and the Romans. I say this to this day. This question will haunt us forever. It will forever be a question. And I think the Sahara itself is another place that haunts Africa because, of course, it's so close to the rest of Africa that people want to separate and then conjoin when there's great civilizations. I still, when I'm looking into West Africa, I still find people talking about how West African civilizations actually belong to North African pale skinned Berbers, which is unbelievable. It's one of the reasons why I like using language to try and debunk this so that I can show that if the Berbers were the people in charge of these places, Why are their languages not so dominant in those regions? Why is it? I mean, Egypt is a very good example of this. If all North Africans are Berbers, why does it stop in Egypt? Why all of a sudden in Egypt does it suddenly cut off and no longer from that region do you get Berbers? Did they just stop in Libya and decide that they were tired? It is such a deep question, but I don't think anyone really has an answer for it. Anyway, here's a quick video by somebody that I think it's very important that we look at other people's opinions on how things work. Now, I will say the nose theory of removing, I've talked about it before. I don't really get deep into it because I have no idea what happened. I do believe that some Europeans would have facilitated removing the noses of people. I mean, in the past, they used to remove the color off of the Romans so that they looked whiter. So it's not impossible for them to do that. And it's not impossible for there to be a combination of things happening. So when they say they remove the noses, it could be a combination of ancient times removal and modern times removal.
So lovely, I came across this video on my For You page on TikTok and I thought to share with you guys where it was actually discovered that the ancient Egyptians were actually black people. And this actually got a lot of people reacting to it because if you watch the ancient, statues of Egyptian people, their nose was actually broken, and there is a reason behind that. And I'm just going to roll the clip as well as some of other stitches I was able to put together. All right, lovelies.
So, like I said, I believe that it is possible that the noses were broken on purpose in the modern times, but there is some evidence to show that ancient people didn't want people in ancient times to breathe, especially those that they hated, and they would chop their noses off. Now, it is kind of unbelievable to think that they would do this all the time, and more suspicious is why Nefertiti's uh fallen bust still has its nose intact, while almost every other statue, no matter what it's made of, has its nose removed. It comes across as very artificial. I will say it looks very suspicious. Anyone who says it doesn't is lying.
Here are two reasons why the Europeans shot the noses and the lips off the Egyptian statues. The first one is the most blatant. They were definitely racist and had an inferiority complex and tried to hide the fact that this great civilization had African features.
An important thing to do, especially if you believe that there has been some altering of statues, is to look into the past and look into drawings made by historians from the past, because ancient Egypt in the past, all they had was drawings and paintings. Now, this is important because in some of these, you'll find noses that were removed early or late, depending on how they're drawn. Now, some people could assume that this was made in the 1900s or whatever, but this is why you have these drawings from back in the day. So when someone accuses something of being a modern creation, you can look back and find out for yourself.
The second reason is because they wanted to destroy the spirit of the statue. Now, in ancient times, whenever you conquered a civilization, you destroyed the images of the rulers. Most spiritual cultures believed when you created an image in the real world, and then that image was then paid homage to by a bunch of people, that image garnered a certain energy then that can live in the spirit world. So they didn't want to destroy the Egyptian images because they still wanted to learn from them.
I'm glad he mentioned this point, even though I disagree a little bit. Now, it is true that when local rulers or local people changed hands, in some cases they would destroy the statues in order to destroy the reputation of the people. But it seems like, for the most part, foreigners who came to Egypt always glorified the statues and remade them and all of the stuff. They were very interested in the culture of Egypt. it isn't until the modern times, maybe we go to the Arabs and such, where there was a lot of vandalizing, trying to destroy a lot of things for religious reasons. Even the Christian time as well. We have an entire building, I think it's in Abydos, where they remove the ancient Egyptian writing and put in Christian writing, which is pretty annoying.
But they shot off the noses so the image couldn't breathe in the spirit world and the image would die. They also shut off the lips so the spirit couldn't talk to you.
It's time to address the most annoying arguments in my comment section that happens every day.
If you don't recognize the next person who shows up on the screen, that's Matt Bashy. He basically makes YouTube videos about anything, but he made one on ancient Egypt at one time, and I reacted to it, and I even put a comment in his channel, which he deleted swiftly, where I showed him, like, yo, this is a link to where I reacted to your video. I don't think it's up to date. I don't think that you've considered everything about why the ancient Egyptians would have such deep black influence in them. And he just moved on from that. Apparently, on TikTok, he's way more active in responding. So I've never seen this before. So I'd like to see exactly what he's going to say.
Were the ancient Egyptians black?
Without context, absolutely. Because that's exactly what the ancient Greeks said. That's what the Arabs said. That's what everybody said, that they were that color. Now, if you start adding context of, are they the same as the Africans that we see today? Do they have any Middle Eastern blood, even a little bit? And all of that, that's a different question. But if you're just asking, would they be considered black people today? The answer is 100%.
And no matter what side you're on, I promise you everyone's going to get something out of this. So without further ado, let's take a trip along the Nile. If we start in Ethiopia, a very, very diverse land, we'll see a lot of ethnicities. Here are just some of the many ethnicities that exist in Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Well, I guess whoever's pushing back on him on TikTok is doing a much better job than me, because he's already in Ethiopia. He never even talked about how deep the Nubians were and how for how long they were in ancient Egypt. So for him to actually include this in this sort of way is actually very confusing to me, actually, to be honest, because it means that he is very or quite considerate when it comes to the rest of Africa. And of course, I'll be honest, there's a reason why I'm doing the West Africa, then I'm going to do Ethiopia, then I'm going to do North Africa, Central African history, because people neglect that history because they're so fascinated with Egypt. And for him to start this far is good. Oh, yeah, don't forget, Ethiopia is the land of Punt, the home of the land of Punt.
There's a lot, like a lot. And many of them have their own languages that are very unique from each other. Different looks, different hair textures, different skin tones. They are very diverse. And some of the languages are from proto-languages from other parts of Africa, but some of the languages that exist in Ethiopia and Eritrea are Afro-Asiatic, which are very similar to Hebrew or Arabic. And as you will see, all of these countries are
Sir, you forgot one language. What about ancient Egyptian, or Hausa, or Omatic, or many of the other languages that it's similar to?
I'm going to show you are very diverse, and that has to do with migration patterns of early humans. Let's move up to Sudan, an even more diverse place. Home of the
I don't know what he means by an even more diverse place. I mean, I would put Ethiopia, and if we include Somalia in here, I'd put it as up there in one of the most diverse places, because they have Sudanic people coming from the north. They have Zanj or Bantu people coming from the south. They have the Cushitic people, the Omotic people. They also have Yemenite people coming in from the east. They also have multiple peoples who were harbored in that region. So Arabs that were brought there due to fear or persecution in their own lands. Not to mention the fact that they dot their way all the way to Oman. all over West Asia.
Dinka, which I think are the tallest ethnicity in the world. The Beha people. And as you go more north, the Nubian people. And I'm not
Okay, so we have to discuss the Nuba. Long time ago, before I fully understood what the Nuba was, in the past, I used to think that the Nuba were the mixed populations of North Africa, and to some degree, they are. It's a modern thing that, if you're mixed with something else, you're no longer part of that group. That's a modern thing. So they definitely are still part of that group, but they would have looked like the same people in South Sudan, the real Nubians and Kerma, and we can see it in their statues. I showed one of them today that they would have looked like that. This is a modern thing. We see the DNA coming in around 500 BC to 500 AD. A lot of it being pushed by Christianity. Oh yeah, one more thing. A lot of the push of it down into Sudan comes from females, which is rare, of course, because when we think of people moving, we usually think of men. But in Sudan, the maternal is the Asiatic side, then the paternal, which is interesting. And it's probably why the people in Sudan still operate with the matrilineal mindset of the rest of Africa.
joking when I say I'm barely scratching the surface of the diversity of Sudan and Ethiopia. But case in point, look at their features and then look at this man's features.
Okay. So I hope he's not going to make the point that I think he's going to make. Now, obviously, those two people have some little differences in features. And I mean, that man that he showed there is like painted and he's like a wrestler. He's not exactly the best example of this race, especially if you use female versus male. I usually like comparing people of the same gender together if you're going to do that. But we must remember that there is a modern influx of Asiatics inside Sudan, and it's written about. And even when we were watched that Kemet Queen girl, the scholars she brought literally started talking about that because everybody is taught about that, especially in the Arab world.
Very, very different. The next and last stop of our tour, let's go to South Egypt, starting in Aswan.
Aswan, as he mentions, is probably one of the most annoying places for people who want to claim that the entirety of Egypt must have looked different than the rest of Africa. And of course, the reason is because at almost every time, the people who were living in this region are documented to be way, way, way black, like Nubians. And this does not start in modern times. This starts with the ancient Egyptians who do declare that these people, if you look at the drawings, are way darker than they are. And of course, this becomes an annoying factor given the fact that there are many, many people who are pharaohs, many people who are important people who come from this area. So the question then becomes, what do we do with all this information? Do we throw it to the side and then pretend that the people of Aswan who came from that area specific are different than the people of Aswan in general? Do we not know that the people of these areas outside in times of war would be depicted exactly the same as the rest of the Egyptians? And why would they do this if there was such a great difference? These are questions that are still yet to be answered. Now, of course, one thing that he's talked about is great diversity. And I want to go back because I think I know what his plan is. But if we talk about diversity, we must remember again that there's a difference between ancient diversity and modern diversity. And of course, DNA can play a role in showing us what this means.
The ethnicities that exist in Aswan are majority Nubians, who look like this, and they dress very similar to Saidis. Very similar. They do have different Galabiyas, they do have different languages, but they both speak Arabic, and they both coexist with each other.
These people obviously represent a purely African DNA again, and the Arab and all of that influx is due to something else as well. But I want to remind you that there were also Jews who ran into this area earlier because of conflict going on in Israel. So they migrated here, and there's a whole host of things. Remember, in Elephantine as well, we find many letters that come from Nubians at the time when the Romans were in charge of Egypt. And I'll make a whole video about all of those letters.
And the more you travel up in Egypt, you'll see just more Saidis. These are traditional Saidis. This is one of my friends, Rami. His family is from Said as well. This part of Egypt.
I think he missed a trick here because, of course, he didn't mention that the people of this area used to speak Old Nubian, and the fact that there's still Cushitic languages within these regions.
Is also where my father's from. My father is a Saidi. But Saidis are exceptionally diverse in their own way. Some of them are as light as me or as dark as the Dinka. But no matter what your melanin content is, in Said, everyone's a Saidi. That doesn't mean that there's not colorism, because there's major colorism. They'll call a dark Saidi black, but that term black in Egypt, especially there, does not mean the same thing as it does the rest of the world.
This is also true for other parts of Africa as there's diversity ranging. So if you look at people in the Khoisan regions, some people who mixed in the Khoisan region who are mixed with Bantu people, like Xhosas, for example, they are still considered that even no matter how light their skin is, even if you can see visually that this person looks like a Khoisan, as long as they are part of the tribe. And this is the thing that I talk about modernism versus Africanity or real African people, because some people like to separate the light skinned Africans and say that to some degree they don't consider themselves real Africans, but to some degree they do. Like I said, the Berbers, for example, they do not separate themselves from the black Berbers. They do call them black Berbers, but they don't separate themselves from them, and they intermingle with them often.
Black in Egypt only means melanin content. They do not mean anything about nose type, hair texture, anything. It is just melanin.
I think as a reminder, it's important to say that the people in ancient Egypt and later the Arabs also looked at the word black more as a color thing, like your skin color rather than your race. And yes, it is true. The Arabs did have the word al Aswad, which depicted black people. And in that, they included people from Yemen who today would be considered Arab and not black, even though the Arabs consider them black.
Finally, we'll end our tour in Cairo and Alexandria. People look like this, like this. And yes, there are people from Cairo that also have this skin tone as well.
This is a good account of what's happening today in Egypt. But of course, if the question is about what was happening in the past, then we'll have a different situation. Even people on either side say that there has been recent migration. So, for example, the whole slave trade of Black Africans into North Africa. I mean, who's going to deny that that did happen? So there must have been some amount of movement in DNA into those regions, leading to the virtual change of DNA. And of course, this could confuse the DNA because, of course, like I said, with the E1B1A, a lot of people they take it as, oh, this means that they have a similar DNA to Black Africans, even if we find it in ancient times. But if it only came in recent times, that would mean that that has to be reevaluated in its own way, which would confuse everything. But again, why do we expect it to be simple?
There's very diverse. Africa is the most genetically diverse continent in the entire world. Whether an individual from any part of this you identify as black is up to your definition of what that word means to you. This man can straight up pass for my uncle, and he's Ethiopian.
Yep. Africa is definitely diverse, but again, the diversity of it is also due to migrations from outsiders, which again, we need to take it into its reality. Africa has a diverse reality, but we need to also look around information and make sure that we are not mistaking ourselves. Now, he is talking about modern Egyptians, so that's fine. although he started with ancient Egyptians. But, ancient and modern, two different things.
And this man could also pass for my uncle. So, what do you think?
The actual question is why this is a question. First off, the Egyptians, of course, were African, and we have evidence from Herodotus and other sources that Africans tended to be black, that they were a range of colors that would constitute black today, and they were actually, the Greek words that are used for them is black.
I'm glad she played this video right after, because of course this speaks to the non-diversity that the people talked about. Because, for example, remember Herodotus said that he could tell the difference between the Egyptians that had gone to Georgia because they were black in skin color. He didn't say black and some of them white. He said black. All of them are black. That's what he said, in skin color. And again, if you want to make the argument that they could have been black Arabs, or not black Arabs, but black people from the Middle East, that's fine, but they would have to be black, which most of the people we're talking about today from the Middle East are not that color.
Ancient Egyptians were black African. That's not a disputed issue among scholars. There are primary sources from Greeks and Romans who saw them. Who the Moors were, the African origins of Arabia.
Well, it's definitely a debated issue within scholars. That's why we're here.
And what you call Arabs today in the Arabic language, it's not disputed. Who the black Berbers are, it's not disputed. So here's what I need the youth to understand. I see many African youths trying to reinvent the wheel, going into debates about trying to prove the ancient Egyptians were African. You don't need to do that. It's not disputed among scholars. The people, they are trolling you. You understand? So it's not a scholarly debate. You think
I wish he was right. I wish it was just trolls. But I promise you, if you go look right now at modern DNA, if you go look at other things, texts and studies, they are heavily leaning towards a foreign origin for ancient Egyptians. And you have a large amount of Egyptian scholars, especially of the DNA that I just talked about. One of the things that they actually push back on is they didn't get the raw study, the other geneticists, so they can look at it themselves. They didn't get the raw information. The information I gave you is the information that they gave, which they want to dissect the whole thing themselves.
You are in a scholarly debate about against people who really think that they somehow were white in ancient Egypt. Yeah, in the later kingdom there were some of those people from Europe. You think you're in a scholarly debate. That's not what's going on. You're dealing with narcissists. You're dealing with trolls. You're dealing with gaslighting. The people you're debating know they were African. They're just trolling you.
Again, I wish he was absolutely right, but again, I do not think these people are trolling. Some of them don't even care about Egypt that much. They're just geneticists. And so I do not believe that they're trolling. I believe that there's bias and misunderstanding which the media runs with. Even when you go look at some of these geneticists, when they talk about the information, they do say that their information has been misrepresented, which is hilarious.
You're wasting your time sort of dealing with essentially narcissism and gaslighting, and you need to come out of that and somehow just accept the truth.
Then first come on, Egyptians were either tan skin or dark Nubians. We don't say African Americans in Egypt, by the way. We say Africans or we say Nubians. So to us, you are a Nubian.
So that's why people keep calling me Nubian Queen.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
something that I've actually noticed from a lot of Egyptians, because there are some here in my country as well, is that they do acknowledge that they do not come from the African continent from a long time ago, but are recent migrants. It's only when you get into these scholarly debates that they seem to think they have no connection with the Middle East, which is kind of weird considering its long history with the Middle East.
you are Nubian to us, you are Nubia. So to the Nubians, we are Egyptians because we are the new Egyptians.
The new Egyptians.
The Nubians are the native Egyptians.
The ancient,
we were
right?
the ones who built ancient Egypt.
Wow.
Who built the pyramids, who built ancient Egypt civilization, who invented Egypt, as we would say, were the Nubians.
Well, damn, put this guy in a debate with Zahi Hawass. I want to see exactly how long it would take for him to try and ban him from Egypt. But yes, he is correct that for the most part, people who have Nubian DNA would have been responsible for a lot of the monuments or most of the ones in the early days.
Doesn't know she's in Africa. You're in the heart of Africa. Yeah, and you belong to here, whether you like it or not.
You said Egyptians are who? They're black people? Egyptians are
The
black.
first black king of Egypt, King Tutankhamun. The statue should be here from where? From black.
Black.
Some of these videos are very heartwarming to see because, of course, this is one of those gut punches for Africans when we hear them say the opposite. So for to see them say this is very good.
Nice to have you home. Where are you from?
Nigeria.
We are black and we're African and we are proud.
Yes.
And the definition of black in Arabic language means beauty. When someone say you're black, say yes, I am beautiful.
So the Egyptians, the first Egyptians were black,
Yes.
And they are black. It's still
We
black.
are black.
It's still black.
And we love to be black.
Amen.
We wouldn't accept any other color. Are you
I was going to mention this earlier, but of course, I'm glad he mentioned it now. Yes, a lot of the Egyptians today, even though they look Middle Eastern, they do have black DNA. And in fact, the study from 2017 showed that they have an increase of 10% compared to blah, 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 blah. So, yes, to some degree, they have black DNA. And that dude, Metabashi guy, who said this is one of the most annoying things that he gets every day. Even he, I'm not surprised that he has uncles that look black. Ancient Egyptians, the modern ones, they mix. And you know what's funny? It's like there was little racism for a while in the Middle East, and then all of a sudden there was a lot of it, and then there was not so much, then there was a lot of it, and it actually ruins things because that's really why we're having this debate. I don't think a lot of people would care if there wasn't that much racism.
using Nivea cream?
No. Screaming.
You need it.
Like seriously, lovelies, this is actually making a lot of sense. I have been seeing these ancient, statues, this Egyptian statue, and sometimes I ask myself, why is it that most of these statues, have their nose maybe broken, their lips broken, and what is the reason behind that? And then I came across this guy on my video who actually explained the whole thing. Like he went ahead to talk.
So I got this video from the YouTube channel Belinda STR Nad. I don't know how to say the lost word. I'm guessing it's standard or stranded. I don't know, but yes, I got it from that channel, and she's gonna go on and talk about Egypt. If you're interested in her views, you can go to her channel and look it up. She looks very professional in the way that she makes her videos, and I'm glad she made this one because I needed to react to it. I didn't even know that Metabashi had reacted again to this type of video. So thank you to her and thank you to everybody who's watching. Like, share, subscribe, and do everything else. Hopefully I can make the same number of videos that I made today, but time is not exactly free for me because of course there's other things I need to do. But yes, thank you. Happy June, I guess.